Hey Titans, this is Mordecai from GamerTitan.com. In this video, we're going to be going over broadcasts. Now, in the previous video, we discussed the various types of context that you can use in core for your games. So, broadcasts is the next logical thing because broadcasting and using events is one of the main ways that we can communicate from both the server to the client and the client to the server. So, just really quick, what is an event? So an event allows us to, as I said, be able to transmit data from a client to the server. And so a good example of that is if you had some sort of UI that you wanted them to click on a button, them being the player clicks on a button, that would all be client side, that interaction with the actual button. And from the client side script, when that button is interacted, it would then do a broadcast, most likely, to the server, and then the server would do the backend logic of whatever it was that that particular button press was supposed to do. So for example, if a player, every time they clicked on a button, were going to gain 100 gold, then that backend logic, the actual giving the player the gold, that would have to be done on the server, especially if you're using like player resources or something like that. You really want your logic for your game to be server validated, but from the client, they're the ones that need to actually interact with the button. And so you would want every client to have obviously their own button to be able to press, and therefore it would need to be client. So quickly taking a look at the API here in the core docs, we can see that there's a few different types of events, and I'll try and cover all of these, but for the most part, the ones that I find myself using the most frequently is usually broadcast to server. And so I will make this a bit bigger for you guys. Let's see if this works. And we will hop into some code, but broadcast to server, what this one is allowing us to do is, as you can see, it says client only. And what this allows us to do is it allows us on a client context script to be able to broadcast to the server whatever data that we wanted the server to do. And so basically on the server, we would then set up a connect for players or connect for player, or we could just do a simple connect. And what that does is it sets up a connection on the server that it's listening for a certain event to be broadcast. And then when that happens, that particular event says, hey, this thing's calling me. Let me go ahead and do the code that I'm supposed to do when that is called. And so when you do that broadcast, then on the other end, the listening, the connection would then actually do whatever it was that you were wanting that code to do. And then on the opposite end, you can do the same to actually broadcast from server to client. And so if you wanted to broadcast to a particular player, so perhaps maybe a particular player needed some sort of information on the client and it was currently on the server, you would use broadcast to player, while something like broadcast to all players, we see this with core components such as like the kill feed up in the top right corner of like the various FPS templates and stuff like that. Or, you know, when the game state is changing, the actual broadcast that says, you know, the next round starting or whatever it is, that is being broadcast to all players. Now, just a few things before we hop into the code here. There is something that you guys need to know, that every core creator needs to know, is that with broadcasting, there are limitations. And so you can see right here, it's mentioning that we can only send 128 bytes of data across a single broadcast. The other thing to note is that we are limited to only 10 of these events per second. So on the server, the actual server itself can do 10 events per second, and each client can broadcast to the server 10 times as well. And so in future videos, if we're trying to, I'll show you, in future videos, I'll show you how I use networked custom properties to kind of get data from the server to the client. But for the most part, the only way that I am aware of to get data from the client to the server is this broadcast to server, which is why this is the one I use the most frequently. Now, there is another type of broadcast, which is just simply doing a broadcast. And so what a just a simple broadcast is, there's no limitations, because if you just have a normal broadcast, that's usually for doing, or I should say always doing, a broadcast across the same context. So as an example, if I had two server scripts and I wanted to set up an event listener that both of these scripts were on server, and one server script broadcast that other scripts that were connected on the listening end had to do, their own individual functions, a broadcast would be a great way to go about that. And because it's on the same context, there is no limitation, because it's, already on the same machine. And so the same thing is true on the client as well. So if that doesn't make too much sense, don't worry just yet. We will go ahead and hop in here. So there will be a little bit of scripting going on here. I'll just always use my handy dandy ball here that I seem to use for every example. And so, for example, say that we wanted to make, let's see here. Let's say that we wanted to make the user be able to click a button and move this ball. How would we go about that? So first off, we have this ball here, and right away, knowing that we would want to move it in the game, once the game's actually running, first off, the context that would need to be is we would need to enable networking on this actual ball. And so now, underneath the ball, what we can do is we could go ahead and make a new script. So go ahead and create a new script, and we'll just name it, whatever, object mover. And just what we'll do is we'll drag this new script in, and we will make it a child of the ball. Actually, to show this off, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and slap this into a server context, this script itself. I should have made that, there we go. And we'll go ahead and put that above. And actually, this doesn't even need to be networked. Okay, so we have our script, and you can see that is in server. We have this ball here that is networked. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this script, and we're going to go ahead and reference the ball right in the script. And so we did that by clicking on the script. We dragged the actual ball in as a custom property, and now it spits out this code that we can copy into our script. So we're going to go ahead and open up our script here. We're going to go ahead and reference this object. And so now in our script, we have actually referenced the object, which is the ball. So this actual script right now, as we know, is in server context. So if we wanted the actual client to be able to interact, to do something with this ball, first of all, we need to make a function that is actually going to do whatever it is that we want this ball to do. So let's see. We'll just do a move to, or move continuous. So we'll make a new function, and because this move continuous is a method, what we'll do is we'll do that. So we're now moving the ball continuously from its current. We need to add in what we're going to be doing. We don't need to do it local, so that'll be false. Vector world velocity. So we'll do vector 3.new 0, 0. I think that'll just make the ball go up. Something is incorrect in my code. Let's go ahead and there we go. So just to double check that this is in fact working, what we'll do is we'll do test.wait, and we'll slap that move to in. And if everything's working, we should be able to see that when we press play, the ball starts moving. So it is in fact going up very slowly, but it is going up. So as you can see, we made it call that function right after 1 second once the game starts. So what happens when we want to actually make it so a client can do something that makes the ball move? Well, first of all, we need to do an events.connect. And this events.connect is simply listening for any event that goes to that has the name of the event. So the first parameter that we need to make is the actual event name. And so from the client, we're going to be broadcasting this event based on whatever name we choose here. And what we can do is we'll say like move ball. So then on the client, what we'll need to do is broadcast to the server this move ball event. And what we want it to do is when it does say, when a broadcast does come across and this connects to it and it says, hey, you know, move ball, that's what I'm listening to, and a client broadcast move ball, what is it that I'm supposed to do when this event is actually fired and I've connected to it? And of course, we want to have it fire the function move to right here. So we'll go ahead and save that. So now we have the very, very basic server logic setup, which is simply the server is connecting to this event, move ball, and when this move ball event is fired, we'll go ahead and move the ball. So now, just to show you, when we press play, nothing's going to happen because obviously nothing's supposed to happen yet. This ball is, you know, not going to move until we do something on the client. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and make a new context, and we're going to make it client context. So inside of the client context, we're going to go ahead and make a new script. So we could just do object mover underscore client, and that allows us to know that this is supposed to be a client. Really, this should be named server, so we can go ahead and rename that just for sanity's sake. So we have object mover server and object mover client. So what we're going to do is go ahead and put this object mover client into the client context, and now you can see that's underscore client, which is our name, but then in brackets we have client, which means that this is in fact a client-side script. So now, because this is only ran in the client, one great thing we can do with the core API is actually get the local player. So the first thing I like to do is do local underscore player equals game dot get local player. And that right there allows us to have access to the player, whoever's machine it is that this client script is running on, and we instantly get access to this actual player. So the first thing we're going to do is set up a keybind, a binding pressed event. And so because we already have the local player, we can do local player, delete that and do that. So now we need to make a function. So what this is actually an event that whenever a particular key press is pressed on the local machine, aka, you know, my machine in this case, this actual function will be fired. Now we haven't made a function yet, so we'll just do on binding pressed. And a few things we need is, for those of you that don't know, I use the script helper a lot, but you can see that I typed in bind, and under player object we have this events, binding pressed event, and there's binding released event. So what we can do is we can do function, make this bigger for you guys, function, oops, called function twice, on bind pressed, and we pass in the player and we pass in the keybind. And so even though this is local, we could do a check just to, you know, as an example, that this does in fact, this player that pressed it does in fact match the local player, which should always be true. And it's because we've only connected this binding pressed event to the local player themselves. So the second one that we need, the second if, is this keybind is actually going to be a string. And I guess what I should do is go to the API again. And so on the API, we can see that under the core API, there's keybinds. So if we click keybinds, we can see that there's a list of keys on the keyboard. And to the right here is the action bindings. And so what this action binding is the actual string. So as an example, say that whenever the player hit 9 on the keyboard, we would want that ball to actually start moving up. And so ability underscore extra underscore 9 is the string that binding pressed event fires when that key is pressed. And so what we could do is if keybind equals ability extra 9, then what we're going to do is we're going to broadcast, change this to broadcast to server move ball, and we'll go and format that. So just as a quick recap, when the local player joins the game, this script is loaded in on the client. It connects this binding pressed event to the local player, and when any binding is pressed, it fires this function. And then this function is checking, hey, a binding was just pressed. Is it the actual binding key press that I'm looking for? And if it is, then we're going to go ahead and broadcast to the server this move ball. And I know that it says the script's deleted. It's because I renamed it. And then on the server side, we're going to connect, and it's going to say, it's going to broadcast to the server. This is going to connect. And once that is broadcast to the server, it's going to fire the function move to, which is moving the ball up. That's the theory. Let's see if the actual code works. So nothing's happening. Let me just go ahead and jump on the ball. I did it before. Let's see if I can do it again. If this takes too long, I will give up, but I thought it would be cool. And it's not working because I suck, apparently. All right, whatever. So if I press 9, it should start going up, and it did. And so we didn't set anything up to actually stop the ball from going up. So that's pretty much the end of what our code does at this point. But it kind of gives a good example of, even though this script is on server and we only want that script to activate or run its code when a certain event is broadcast. So just as an example, go ahead and delete this. We'll move this over here. And we'll do this. So as you can see, on the right here is the server script. On the left is the client. And you can see how these interconnect to each other. So just one more time, the events are simply whatever side is listening to this particular event name. You use connect or connect for player. And the difference between the two is connect for player automatically will pass in the player that did that. So when you broadcast to server, if this connect for player, it automatically passes in the player. In this case, I just use simply connect because we're not using anything to do with the player. But to actually show you guys real quick, if we did connect for player, without changing anything else, this move to, the first parameter would be player, and we could just do player die. And so now, because we changed it from just simply connect to connect for player, the first parameter should be the player that clicked the keybind, and we can do player die. So now, if this works, when I press 9, the ball should start going up, and I should just die. And as you can see, I am not looking too good, and the ball is in fact moving. So that's where, that's where connect for player is useful, is we don't even need to actually pass as a parameter to this, because as you know, there is as we discussed earlier, there's a limitation to how much data can be broadcast to the server and to the client. So just one thing to note is we could also we could also pass other parameters into this, which would then, this connection would actually add in for us. So let's see here. Trying to think of what I could do as an example. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to change this up. We're going to have keybind 8. We're going to pass -50. And then keybind 9, we're going to pass 50. So what we're going to do is we'll do int, and we'll put int here. And so just as a quick recap, what we're doing, I need to save this, is depending on the keybind that I press now, it's going to pass either positive number or a negative number. So when I press 9, it goes up. When I press 8, it goes down. And we haven't changed anything in the actual connection, but what it's doing is because this is the first parameter, well, because we're passing one parameter, we also have connect for player. It's already accepting the player as the first parameter, and then it's passing this. So we'll go ahead and hop back into preview. We'll press 9. It's going up, and I'm already dead, but if I press 8, then it should go back down. And as you can see, it is in fact going down. And so we can just keep doing that. So there you go. Let's see. The same is true for, and once again, just a quick recap, this broadcast to server from each individual client, we can do 10 of these per second. So throughout all of your game, the client can only be broadcasting to the server 10 times per second, which is in fact quite generous, because I do find myself only really using the broadcast to server for like UI and stuff like that. And then on the actual server, if we wanted to broadcast back something to the player, which I guess we should go ahead and set up. So let's actually do one more thing. We're gonna add some UI. So we're first gonna go and add a container. This all needs to be in client context. We're gonna add some text. And we'll just put it in the middle of the screen because it doesn't really matter too much. Should have made this a panel. I'm not a UI designer. All right, so we're gonna slap that back there. I'm just doing this so we can actually see the text real quick. Oops. We'll get this eventually, I apologize. All right. So it needs to inherit from that. Okay. So after all of that, all I was trying to do is get the text right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to reference on the client this new text box that we made. And we're actually going to make this text nil, just nothing in it. And then through code, we reference this text box. So we're going to go into our client side script. We're just going to name this variable text. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do a connection. So events dot connect, and we're going to connect ball moved and on ball moved is going to be the function. So we're going to do function on ball moved, and we're just going to pass an int, and that's going to be the value. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this text box, and I know I should have named it text, but it's going to be text.text. So this is the object. You know what, we'll just, for sanity, we'll change this to text field. So text field.text, and what we're going to do is we're going to make it change that when it gets this listener. So it's going to change it to whatever the int that is passed back is. Now, just to be clear, this is only for an example because we clearly are broadcasting to the server what the int is. So I guess what we actually should do is, if it's a positive number on the server, we'll send back if it's going up or going down. I think that's a better example instead of passing back and forth the same value. And so on the server, we're going to take this out and not kill the player anymore. We're going to do if int is over 0, then we're going to make a new string, we're going to do string equals going up, else string equals going down. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to do events dot broadcast to player, and we're going to do ball moved. And just to double check, because I don't use events broadcast to player often, broadcast to player, so the first value or the first parameter we need to put is which player we're supposed to be broadcasting it to. So we are passing the player, the script helper is extremely helpful. So player string name arguments, so that's where we would actually put after string. Go ahead and format that. And so just as a quick recap, on the client we're passing how much the ball should move. The server gets it, it moves the ball, it takes a look at what the int is. If it's over 0, we create a string saying going up. If it's less than 0, we say going down. And then we broadcast it back to the player on what is actually happening. And the actual text box is not large enough for what we're trying to do here, so we'll just make it a bit bigger here. Okay, so when I press 9, it's going up. When I press 8, it's going down. And so the server is actually the one that's verifying if it's going up or down. The client is the one telling it what to do. So that is kind of a quick example of going back and forth, but hopefully that makes sense. So I know this was a rough example, but this kind of shows you how to use events. It's like I said, I try and limit how many broadcasts I do to the client. So broadcast to player as an example. And what I usually use is a network custom property. So I will, in another video, I will show how I use network custom properties to transmit data from the server to the client. But on the client side, I pretty much anything UI or keybinds, any action that you want to capture from the actual player and use it to actually do something on the server, using broadcast to server is the best way to do it. And like I said, for broadcasting to the player is a 10 limit on the server, and then on the client, the broadcast to server is a 10 limit per client. So there's a lot more room to mess with on the client side broadcasting to the server than having the server have to do broadcasts to all the various players. But regardless, hopefully this video helped. If you want more correlated content, please hit that subscribe button. If this video was helpful, please hit that thumbs up. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. And I will be making more videos. So any questions you have regarding this video, events, or any type of video that you'd like me to see me film in the future, please do so in the comments below. And once again, hit that subscribe button if you'd like more correlated content. I will catch you next time, Titans.